Hello, this is Stone Warden coming back at you today with another video update. And today we're going to talk about the potential for a tropical cyclone to form in the Caribbean. Right now, the National Hurricane Center doesn't have any outlook area for the Caribbean, but I do expect at some point that this area will be maybe a lemon, maybe a 10% or maybe a 20% area, maybe about late weekend, early next week. But I do expect some type of percentage to be added over here in this region at some point. So we'll talk about that in today's video. If you've been liking my weather content, please subscribe as I bring daily weather updates, or at least I try to. But without further ado, we're going to get right into it. So, looking at the GFS ensembles, we're going to start off with the ensemble members. I don't like showing dermatistic model runs because they're highly inaccurate and they like to fluctuate way too much. So I stick to the ensembles because they're the most uh, key tool to use when you're looking at far out systems like this or potential systems such as this one. So we're starting out for today, and we're going to be going forward, and you're going to notice that you're going to get a highlighted area down here in the Caribbean. And generally speaking, you get a pretty big area of concern from the GEFS ensemble members, and they split. Some of them head into the Gulf, but some of them head straight up the middle. But if you notice, you got the ensemble members. None of them really bring a threatening scenario to the USA. There may be a couple isolated runs that do show that, but you got a majority of them. Majority of them stay over the islands or they push out to sea. So people who are posting those, dermatistic model runs that are showing catastrophic systems hitting the USA. You look at the ensembles; they're not really showing that, which is why I like to use the ensemble members because they're a lot more accurate, and it is a tool with many members. Not just one single run. It's made up of many different models to give us a more accurate depiction of what we're dealing with. And you can see how most of these they either go out to sea or they stay over the islands. So that certainly is a possibility. But you can see how the GUS almost are definitely keen on something developing over here in the Caribbean. So we have to watch that area. Now looking at EPS ensembles are a lot more anemic. They're not as nearly as excited as the GEFS ensembles. Here, let me switch to the OOZ run because yeah, it goes out further. Well, never mind because it's not loaded fully. So I'll try to show you. Let's try this morning's run. So we go through this morning's run. It doesn't go that far out, but we go through this morning's run, and it only goes out to Wednesday, October 30th. But if we compare both time frames, you can notice how by this time frame the GFS ensembles definitely already have something trying to develop, whereas the EPS ensembles, we're getting into Wednesday morning. They got a couple members, but nothing that's nearly as excited as the GFS. For some reason, OOZ was stuck last night, so I can't show you the full run of that. But just to give you an idea, the EPS ensembles are pretty anemic. They don't show nearly as many potential members as the GFS ensembles do. So again, it's kind of like a GFS versus Euro type thing right now, where GFS is certainly more aggressive, EPS is more weak. I think a strong middle ground, 50-50 chance on both sides is certainly a possibility. There's definitely some limiting factors, but there's also some factors that could help aid in development. And then we'll talk about it towards the end of the video. Now, looking at our steering pattern, our steering currents. So let's say hypothetically we're seeing a system that develops in the Caribbean. So we're going to switch over to Western Atlantic view. So let's say hypothetically we get a system that develops in the Caribbean. So here's our steering pattern going forward. There's a couple things to note. Number one, you have a pretty strong ridge located right over the eastern United States. But another thing that you have is you have a pretty strong western trough located over here in the west. So, and this is next Wednesday, Thursday, right when our ensembles really start to increase. So a couple things to note. Trough over the west, ridging over east. This type of pattern, I feel like an idea of this will probably send more things out to sea because of how strong this ridge is over the eastern United States. I don't really think we'll have a storm plowing right into this ridge. So I could see something like the GFS ensembles, which push this more out to sea, or to kind of linger it over the islands. There's a couple isolated members that get out in the Gulf of Mexico, but there's not many members that do that. And so, with that very strong ridge over top, I feel like it would be very hard for something to get too far north, because that's a fairly strong ridge. And so I feel like, if we get a system to develop, it'll probably go more out to sea. But again, this far out, steering currents aren't always certain, and they're certainly not going to stay this way. They're certainly going to change. But you see a trough out west, ridging over the east, and if we get a system to develop, there's a ridge over top, which means that if a system was to develop, I feel like it would be pretty hard for it to get pretty far north. So that'd be something to watch. Here's the EPS steering currents located. And again, you'll notice we have that ridge over top, western trough look. And with this look, again, we'll probably have a system that has a hard time really going north, because you have a fairly strong ridge over the eastern United States, which, while this isn't related to the video, we're probably going to have some fairly warm temperatures over the eastern United States towards Halloween. But you can kind of see our steering currents pretty clear. You can see our streamlines, how they go down and they go up. Kind of like a slide. I always say a slide. It's kind of like a slide to me, how you go down and then you go up. And so you have a western trough, eastern ridging. So that's the look currently that I'm seeing on the forecast models. So we have to watch that. Now, looking at factors that could aid in development, you have fairly warm temperatures over the Caribbean. This could certainly aid in development of a system. These are really warm temperatures, so I could definitely see something getting it going. These are pretty explosive temperatures, in fact, so it definitely supports some development. And even in the Gulf of Mexico, you still have some warm temperatures, but things are certainly calming down and starting to quiet down as we go out in time. Now, we talked about some differences in the models with wind shear, and it's kind of like a GFS versus European model battle. So we're going through time, and we're going to go closer towards when this system really starts to develop. And I want you to take note of a couple of things here. One being, it looks like we're probably going to have a trough located somewhere up in here as this system really starts to form. Don't pay attention to this L, because, like I said, these models are back and forth. These thermotistic model runs, they're very inaccurate, and they don't really give us any real detail or accurate representation of what's actually going to happen, considering it's only one model run. But I want you to take note of a couple of things off the GFS model. One being, you see our trough located to the north? You have a trough located to the north, and let me draw this on your screen so that you can see it. You have a trough located to your north. There's a couple things. One, the GFS shows less hostile wind shear to the system, which allows the system to really develop. Two, it shows this trough to the north. What this trough could help do is allow for forcing and allow for convection to really develop in the Caribbean and to get a system going. So there's a couple things actually going for a system to develop, along with warm ocean waters. So trough to the north, less hostile wind shear, and very warm ocean waters could support development of a system. Whereas the European model shows more hostile wind shear and less of a favorable trough interaction, which leads to less development chances. So, those are some differences between the models, but I just want to give you an idea of what the models are basically showing and why we're seeing the differences. Whereas the Euro model showed much more hostile wind shear, much stronger wind shear, and doesn't show nearly as favorable trough interaction as GFS does. So, and it also looks to show a much deeper trough, which also helps really to intensify that wind shear over the Gulf and even the Northern Caribbean. That's plentiful wind shear right there to tear apart a system. Now, looking at the dry air entrainment and how dry air may affect any development chances as well, you're going to go through time, and again, don't really pay attention to the L or the number, but that's pretty solid dry air across the Gulf of Mexico. And that's another thing, you typically don't have systems that are just able to plow into this dry air. Now, again, a couple things could happen. We could have one of those systems that are much smaller and much less susceptible to dry air intrusions. or we could have a big moisture bubble that could form that could also be less susceptible to drier intrusion. So there's a lot of details that we won't really know until we get closer to this in time, because this may just be, you know, a European model weak bias, or it could be a GFS aggressive bias. But there certainly are a couple of factors that could certainly support a system developing in the Caribbean. Now, the European model, which shows less development chances, shows plentiful drier, and it in fact gets drier all the way into the Caribbean, which will also really lessen those development chances. So again, you know, there's definitely some model differences between what happens in the Caribbean, but there are certainly things going for this system to form and possibly develop. So I wouldn't be surprised if we get like a 20 or a 10% chance of the area of interest over here in the Caribbean, maybe by late weekend or maybe by early next week. But that's all I really got, guys. I don't really want to over talk this because we just don't simply have an area of interest right now. It's just more so just some talk and just some model guidance out there showing different things. But for now, though, no concern to the lower 48. But I will certainly keep you aware of any potential systems that may form in the Caribbean.